It wasn't just a dramatic season edit. It wasn't even a fight caught on camera. The alleged reason behind Andrei Kastrovic and Elizabeth Pothast's full-blown fallout with TLC goes way beyond anything aired in their years on 90 Day Fiancé. According to multiple insiders, Andrei and Libby are now facing what might be the most extreme move TLC has ever made against a cast member: a reported lifetime franchise ban and a behind-the-scenes legal storm that's allegedly reaching up to $1 million in potential damages. Let that sink in. A couple once defended by production now blacklisted completely, not benched, not on pause, banned for life. Welcome to Sister Wives Daily. I'm Sarah, and if you've made it this far, you're exactly where you need to be. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments, did you ever see this coming? Or did we all get played with a perfect edit? Because if what's been whispered behind NDA-filled hallways is even partially true, Andrei and Libby's golden couple status didn't crumble from divorce, drugs, or scandal. It cracked quietly, slowly, from the inside out. While the audience debated family drama and those aggressive confessionals, production was allegedly documenting a side of this couple so disruptive that filming was stopped, complaints were filed, and crews began refusing to work with them. These aren't fan theories. These are industry-level whispers tracked over years, and in recent months, they've grown a lot louder. Fans remember the shouting matches, Andrei's ego, Libby's sometimes too calm passive delivery, the family fights that rerouted entire episodes, but the most shocking parts never aired. Why? Maybe because they weren't entertaining, maybe because they were liabilities. What kind of behind-the-scenes behavior would escalate to the point where a network that builds its brand on chaos decided, enough's enough? Pair that with the timing. While newer couples are doing soft launches and side hustles, Andrei and Libby have been noticeably missing from every single upcoming special, crossover, or pillow talk invite. Nothing, silence. For a pair that clung to relevance like oxygen, that's not a coincidence. That's a reset button being quietly, permanently pressed. And what makes this even messier is the track record. For years, fans chalked up Andrei's outbursts to his personality. He was marketed as the blunt, unapologetic foreign husband who clashed with Libby's loud American family. But when you zoom out, a pattern emerges. Not flavorful drama, alleged professional volatility, yelling off camera, conflicts with producers, crew members filing concerns, entire scenes being scrapped because of disruptions, and yet they kept being brought back, season after season. Why? Ratings, controversy, the illusion of control. But somewhere in the last year, that illusion cracked, and allegedly, a legal paper trail is now forming behind the scenes with claims that TLC has finally had enough. The reported $1 million figure isn't random. It tracks with production losses, suspended shoots, added security, studio changes, delays, all of which cost money, real money. And if certain reports are to be believed, TLC was internally warned for years about keeping this duo on payroll. So the question really becomes, what tipped the scale? Because banning one of the most well-known couples in your franchise and threatening legal action on top of it isn't just about one incident. It's about build-up. It's about reaching a point where the reward no longer outweighs the risk. And now, TLC might be cleaning house quietly so the rest of the machine doesn't collapse. But what if the real reason wasn't a single outburst or one lost shoot day? What if the network had its own reasons to keep Andrei and Libby quiet until it didn't? And if there were warning signs way back, why weren't we paying attention to them sooner? Andrei always played the part of the over-the-top alpha, loud, stubborn, brash. Libby leaned into the innocent role, sweet wife, peacemaker, protective mom. Together, they built a brand of controlled chaos. Sharp tongues, family feuds, but always with a safety net. TLC's cameras, story editors, and producer buffers lining every fall. But behind the scenes, multiple insiders say that chaos wasn't controlled at all. It was boiling. It was slowly becoming something the network couldn't spin, reshape, or delay in post. Something even crew members were scared to handle. Because on screen, Andrei's outbursts were just part of the show. Off camera, insiders claim producers began actively managing his appearances, not to polish his image but to protect production staff. There were incidents reported, not always dramatic, sometimes subtle, but persistent, allegedly involving hostility, out-of-bounds rants, sudden lockdowns on set, and bursts of energy that made people on-site uncomfortable. Think about that. You're not talking about staged drama or scripted tension. You're talking about real-life logistics that collapsed under pressure because someone wouldn't de-escalate when the lights turned off. And then there's Libby. Too many fans have underestimated her role in this spiral. While Andrei was painting with a loud brush, Libby was quietly amplifying the storm. For years, she played neutral. But public silence doesn't mean private calm. People close to production claim that when the cameras were off, she wasn't passive. She defended his behavior. She showed up demanding changes, allegedly refusing certain filming conditions if respect wasn't shown. Respect. For what behavior, exactly? Their growing list of behind-the-scenes demands reportedly included crew swaps, location changes, and controlling how certain conversations were filmed. Multiple sources say they went from being managed talent to trying to run the show themselves. And the irony? TLC let it happen. For a while, because audience retention was high, social media was buzzing. Whatever happened on set, the network was still getting what it wanted. Until it wasn't. There's one story that's floated around for a while now, unconfirmed but widely believed by staff, about a full production day that was cancelled because of an explosive off-camera argument between Andrei and a member of the show's logistics team. Allegedly, things got so heated, security had to step in, and crew members were told to pack early. No one filmed. No one got paid. That type of disruption doesn't just risk the schedule, it risks legal liability, insurance, payroll, and when it starts stacking up, someone eventually pulls the emergency brake. Still, if you followed TLC for long enough, you know this isn't the first couple with drama. So why now? Why them? Why this level of sudden, extreme consequence? That's where the secrecy comes in. TLC has a habit of shielding cast members as long as they deliver. The network has turned bigger scandals into mid-season cliffhangers instead of consequences. Think about who they've protected before. Think about who they still do. That's what makes this whole situation so bizarre. Because if they're willing to throw this much money, privacy, and protection at a couple like Andrei and Libby for years on end, something massive must have finally snapped their patience. Remember, this wasn't a scandal that spilled from TMZ. This wasn't public fights, court dates, or arrests that couldn't be scrubbed. Everything unfolding now, it's coming from quiet channels, leaks, producers, people on the inside watching the cleanup happen without a single cast post to confirm it. And that right there should terrify anyone who still thinks this was just a family drama arc. One editor who worked multiple tell-all specials allegedly set off the record that Andrei's energy offstage always created tension that made the crew work twice as hard. He hinted that TLC started using backup staff whenever his scenes shot, just in case. Just in case, think about that phrase. Networks don't spend extra money unless they're managing risk. And even though no violent incident was ever publicly confirmed, the pattern is enough to raise questions TLC seems no longer willing to keep dodging. And what's worse, there were signs we all missed years ago. Screaming matches that seemed too raw to be acting. Libby's nervous smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes on certain confessionals. The sudden shift in editing tone from season to season, softer one year, then harsh the next, as if producers were fighting to keep the audience from turning too fast. That's not inconsistency, that's crisis management in real time. Fan forums noticed moments that seemed off long before news broke. That one season where their airtime was weirdly reduced. The casting and production delay. Even Libby's vague social posts where she asked fans to respect our space without saying what was happening. Now reread those with this knowledge in mind. It hits different, doesn't it? Because here's the darker reality no one's wanted to say out loud. A couple doesn't get banned forever and threatened with legal fallout unless the folks writing the checks finally feel unsafe, unstable, or completely out of control. And if those feelings were creeping into staff meetings, budget decisions, or insurance calls, you can guess what happened next. What is TLC trying so hard to bury, and why did it take them this long to pull the plug? The real story was hiding in plain sight. For years, the drama between Andrei and Libby seemed excessive, sure, but never entirely out of bounds. Until the leaks, until the emails. Until people who used to work on sets started quietly pointing to what fans didn't see because it never made it into the cut. There were red flags, documented ones, according to some insiders. Disruptions and shutdowns that were quietly passed off as technical delays or logistics issues, when, in reality, entire filming days were allegedly scrapped over behavior that crossed too many internal boundaries, too many times. One former crew member reportedly described the vibe on set with Andrei as walking on glass under lights. No one knew which version of him would show up. The argumentative loudmouth who made for good TV, or the off-camera wild card who treated crew like they were beneath him. Production teams aren't paid enough to babysit. They're trained to steer chaos, not survive it. And allegedly, more than a few of them said they wouldn't return if he remained part of the cast. The problem? He always did. The reports aren't subtle anymore. They outline a timeline of moments when filming was compromised, hours wasted, tense meetings, verbal spats, safety flags thrown up. Every so-called bad edit covered one more incident fans never knew took place. It's one thing to create drama between cast members. That's what sells. It's another thing when those behind the camera can't do their jobs because two people in front of it refuse to follow even the most basic expectations. And yet, all of it was masked with clever editing tricks and well-timed music stings. That's what makes this mess so dangerous. Viewers were sold an image of dysfunction that felt controlled. Family tension, sure, cultural clashes, always. But never anything that hinted at permanent bans or legal escalation. That is, until someone behind the scenes stopped protecting the image and started speaking up. There's one report that stands out. A production assistant claimed that during a shoot at a rental property, Andrei allegedly screamed at a coordinator over a scheduling issue, refused to be mic'd, and left the scene before footage could be gathered. Sounds small, but when multiple location shoots are built around one person's availability, that kind of behavior kills budget, insurance coverage, and time. Even worse, when questioned later, he reportedly justified it. Said he didn't like the tone. This wasn't a guest on set. This was a lead cast member, shutting down an entire day because someone asked him to cooperate. And we were watching it happen all along, without realizing the scale. That confession cam meltdown where Andrei cursed and stormed out, fans laughed, memes were made, but for the crew trying to finalize sound levels or wrangle schedules, that tantrum burned money and morale. Libby, meanwhile, told producers he was passionate and misunderstood. And maybe he was, but apologies don't pay overtime. Dismissiveness doesn't cover reshoots. Over time, the excuses start to sound like cosigns. Psychologically, fans miss the bigger warning signs because the drama was hooked into family systems we've been trained to overlook. Loud father figures, shrill sisters, emotional wives biting their lips. It felt like a soap opera, not a workplace breakdown. The show framed it that way. But behind the fourth wall, the control was slipping. And it seems TLC only acted when internal reports reached the point where legal consultants and executive teams had no more plausible deniability. Allegedly, one legal review of crew complaints described the environment around the Castrovet family as persistently unproductive and emotionally draining. That's not creative feedback. That's network code for "we're about to get sued if we keep this up." Even the on-air edits started hinting at a breakdown. One season, scenes were jump cut in awkward beats. Another, the family dinners were always chaotic, never resolved. The confessionals became more general, vague, like producers were avoiding raw commentary that might backfire. It was as if everyone filming knew the line was approaching and didn't want their fingerprints on it when it snapped. Then there's the eerie silence from season to season. Storylines dropped without resolution. Travel arcs that never happened. Remember when Andrei was supposedly entering the real estate business, and it became this main plot point, then disappeared completely? According to background chatter, one reason was that the job site refused future filming access unless certain cast were restricted on location. Crew had allegedly complained. Clients had concerns, so the narrative got clipped. Wrapped up fast, no one mentioned it again. Another clue, social media. The couple's behavior online shifted subtly, then drastically. First came vague posts about needing a break and protecting peace. Then came inactive accounts. No clear callouts, just a growing vacuum of updates from two people whose brand relied on being loud, sure of their opinions, and publicly dramatic. The silence was strategic and scary because it matched the downturn in screen time. And when someone who depends on drama suddenly shuts up, you have to ask why. One recurring insider detail is that near the end of their franchise presence, Andrei and Libby were reportedly flagged to have an executive rep physically present during all shoots. A senior-level observer. That only happens when network stakeholders want daily accountability. That's not reality TV. That's damage control. The pattern: repeat, ignore, escalate. Rinse, then crisis manage. TLC's internal culture didn't want to admit that the couple they'd helped turn into headline makers had become a source of potential liability. So they pretended. Until pretending no longer protected them. But what if we told you some of the most serious incidents weren't just about disruption, but something far closer to reputational exposure? A $1 million lawsuit. That's the number now being whispered behind closed doors, not in tabloids, not in public filings, yet, but in internal conversations, legal circles, and alleged leaks from people who have worked within or close to production. When people first heard the number, it sounded like clickbait, drama inflation. But behind reality TV, there's a real cost to chaos. Especially when that chaos spills beyond the screen, disrupts production, endangers staff morale, and potentially puts the network at risk. Allegedly, that's what happened here, and TLC may be done picking up the bill. $1 million in damages doesn't just come out of nowhere. That figure typically includes a combination of halted filming days, back-end penalties, lost advertiser time slots, rescheduled air dates, post-production delays, And yes, legal retainer fees for every mess that quietly touched a lawyer's desk. The entertainment industry runs on tight timelines and even tighter contracts. If just one talent becomes a disruption, it throws everything off: crew, venues, schedules, insurance. Over time, this reportedly added up. One former production staffer claimed off the record that certain episodes involving Andrei and Libby cost considerably more than they should have due to consistent issues on set. More hands needed, extra security, last-minute revisions, fixing broken timelines because someone walked off or refused to follow call sheets. Not once, repeatedly. In other networks, a single flare-up might get handled in-house with a warning. But reality TV, especially from a channel like TLC, builds entire franchises on recurring characters. Their emotional investments. Contracts are long-term. Stars are often brought back no matter how off the rails things get, because the brand depends on continuity. That's why this situation stands out. TLC didn't just pull them from future appearances. They reportedly banned them for life. That's a chain reaction that doesn't happen without paperwork, without emails, board meetings, legal advisements, and someone finally saying, "This is no longer sustainable." The legal escalation, allegedly now involving million-dollar penalties, signals something most fans never get to see. The line where reality TV stops being about entertainment and starts being about corporate survival. Because it's one thing when your cast fights with each other on camera. That's free content. But once they cross the barrier and start disrupting the machine, or making the crew feel unsafe, or the budget team start sweating, that's liability. Look at TLC's record. They've walked through some disturbing scandals and still kept people on air. The Duggar family spiraled into infamy after scandal, and the network only distanced itself when the public heat became impossible to ignore. Even then, it wasn't the first mistake, it was the 10th one. TLC is not quick to cut, and with Andrei and Libby, they didn't. They tolerated years of issues, according to insiders. But slowly, a pattern emerged. One that crossed a threshold even TLC couldn't work around. Producers, according to multiple leaks, started warning higher-ups multiple seasons ago. Early incidents were brushed off as personality issues. But as more crew complaints came in, those warnings turned into documentation. Then risk assessments. Then meetings with legal. By the time the couple reappeared on later seasons, there were reportedly guardrails in place. Staff rotations, shoot limits, behind-the-scenes discussions with legal observers. That's how you know things were serious, when reality TV producers, who usually want the chaos, start bringing attorneys into tapings. The timeline is subtle, but it's there if you watch closely. During their last aired stretch, suddenly the confrontation style changes. Scenes become shorter, emotions feel more edited. The chaos gets dull, not because drama disappeared, but because so much had to be removed to clean it up. One editor allegedly said they spent more hours cutting things out than building storylines when it came to Andrei's footage. That's not creative storytelling. That's post-production trying to keep a powder keg from blowing up in final cut. And the shift wasn't just visible, it was trackable. By the time rumors of legal friction started circulating, fans had already noticed that other couples were dominating screen time, while Andrei and Libby's storyline was suddenly on the periphery. Deleted scenes, abrupt endings to key arcs, and meanwhile, behind closed doors, multiple alleged threats were surfacing. Partnership clauses that could no longer be honored. Deliverables that were rejected due to what insiders describe as ongoing cast conduct issues. Translated, TLC wanted to end it quietly, but bad PR rarely ends quietly. Insiders claim that one of the final straws came when multiple off-camera incidents accumulated into a formal memo reviewed by legal advisors and finance at Discovery, TLC's parent company. The document reportedly outlined too many unrecoverable costs associated with continuing to cast the couple. That's where the dollar sign first appeared. 1 million, that's not just an invoice. That's a red flag toward future lawsuits against the network if they didn't take action. So they did. And this raises a critical question. What is considered part of the show, and what crosses the line into corporate liability? Because producers are trained to push for conflict, to stir emotion, to manufacture heat. But when cast behavior results in lost production days, threats of walkouts, and a crew ready to quit, it's no longer just good TV. It's a direct threat to the structure keeping the show alive. TLC reportedly tried everything to manage the storm privately. Soft trips, scripted redemption arcs, PR filters. Some even say the network hoped to transition Andrei and Libby off the main franchise onto a spin-off, an option that was allegedly dropped when legal timelines and insurance reports made it clear this wasn't a slowdown. This was a shutdown. And here's the real twist: this alleged million-dollar lawsuit. It's not clear if it's even finalized or if it's still a private internal threat meant to cover damages. That ambiguity means two things. The couple probably saw this coming, and TLC is still cleaning quietly behind the scenes. But the fact that multiple insiders across different productions are repeating this number, name, and consequence means the silence may not last long. What happens when the cost of keeping someone on air becomes greater than the chaos they bring in? That's the line Andrei and Libby may have finally crossed for good. Lifetime bans don't happen often. Not in reality TV, and definitely not on a network like TLC, where controversy is usually seen as currency. But this time, something changed. Unlike past cast members who have caused public scandal and still quietly resurfaced under sister shows or cameos, Andrei and Libby haven't just disappeared, they've been shut out. Flatlined, removed from the booking grid. Nobody at TLC is talking about them publicly. No vague statements. No press releases. Just a total blacklisting that insiders now say comes with a word no one throws around lightly in this business. Permanent. The reason this lifetime ban feels different comes down to how TLC usually handles drama. With other cast members, whether it was personal scandals, criminal charges, or aggressive behavior, there was a pattern. Distance delay, and eventually some level of return. Even if it wasn't back on the main show, they'd pop up in throwbacks, compilation specials, or pillow talk bonanza bloopers. Once part of the 90-day universe, always hanging around the edges. But not Andrei and Libby. Their entire presence has been scrubbed from future episodes and mentions. Not even retroactive clips are running in promotional packages. Their name sends silence through production calls now, according to two separate freelance editors who have worked with casting coordinators. This silence, it signals something deeper than dislike or drama gone too far. It signals liability. And that's where TLC draws the real line. One former production coordinator, who worked on several tell-alls, explained that the network doesn't even have an official process for lifetime bans. Usually, when someone becomes too difficult, they're just passed over quietly in rotation, phased out, or looped in a few years later if perception cools. But in rare cases, especially when contracts violated internal codes linked to HR protocol or on-set security concerns, decisions are made that go beyond production preferences. According to her, this happens when legal and insurance teams get uncomfortable. Not producers, not casting. When the lawyers get antsy, that's the ballgame. Andrei and Libby's behavior, reportedly documented through multiple seasons of internal memos, reached that point. Sources say the choice wasn't just about their attitude. It was about the perceived risk of bringing them back. A cast member who fights is manageable. A cast member who makes others feel unsafe, behaves unpredictably, and repeatedly derails the filming schedule. That's a wild card no one wants to bet production money on. It's not just about what's legal, it's about what's insurable. If a show's crew doesn't feel safe or compliant, or if the working conditions become volatile enough to risk cancellation, the insurers can pull their support. One industry insider noted that once you risk working lawsuit territory or breach safety protocol, the business becomes unsustainable. And even though we haven't seen lawsuits filed publicly against TLC in relation to the couple, there's quiet talk of settlement language being protected under NDAs. Now, if you're wondering why this ban happened now as opposed to earlier, especially given all the problems we now know were stacking for years, the answer ties back to brand control. TLC built Andrei and Libby up as part of their signature family chaos narrative. They were a guaranteed ratings bump every time they clashed with Libby's siblings or declared war at a family cookout. And as long as that chaos stayed within the bounds of viewer expectation, it was fine. Entertaining, even. But when that behavior extended off camera, into location disputes, contract demands, and production shutdowns, it stopped being marketable and started becoming expensive. And viewers were catching on too. Over time, audience reactions to Andrei shifted. Early seasons saw him as a tough-love foreign dad, sweet at times, blunt at worst. But later, that shifted into visible discomfort. Comment sections started skewing more critical. Audience loyalty began to fracture. TLC reportedly monitors social sentiment closely, especially as advertisers have grown more picky with where their products air. If the cast begins feeling more like a threat than a character, brand deals wobble. Add that to recent pressure from sponsors wanting cleaner, more ethically curated casts, and you've got a finished equation. One unreliable couple plus rising production, complaints plus advertiser side eyes, equals contract termination dressed as a blackout. There's also a difference between rumors and formal action. Fans are quick to assume someone's banned when they disappear from air for a season. But insiders will tell you, there's a big difference between not being invited back and being entirely removed from the roster. The tell. TLC didn't even include Andrei or Libby in crossover opportunities, reaction episodes, or Instagram retrospectives that recycle nearly every past cast member available. Once that machine stops calling and stops liking your posts from the official account, you've been cut out, not rotated, cut. And what makes this all the more telling is how the network has historically operated. Josh Duggar was kept on air through multiple controversies until the bottom truly fell out. Even then, TLC shifted the family into spin-off safe zones before finally burning that bridge. On 90 Day Fiancé itself, couples with tax issues, domestic rumors, and even borderline criminal behavior have managed to squeak back in somehow. But not this time, not with Andrei and Libby. The decision, according to industry whispers, came from higher than usual. Not just producers but Discovery-level executives, probably pushed by internal incident tallies that finally reached a tipping point. And it makes you think. The couple who once rode the wave of chaos to center screen may have underestimated how tightly that wave is monitored behind the scenes. How lines are drawn not in internet hashtags, but in black and white insurance clauses, risk assessments, and escalating crew concerns that no edit can oversell. And here's the kicker, it was all building from day one. That first explosive family dinner, that yelling match on the beach, that misunderstood alpha narrative, those weren't just moments of tension, they were warnings dressed up as plot. Warnings we ignored. Or maybe warnings TLC let us ignore until they couldn't anymore. And with the door now slammed shut, we're left wondering, did they ruin it, or did TLC finally get honest about what they were hiding behind the chaos all along? When the silence started, it wasn't loud. No formal statements, no fiery Instagram fights, no one from the 90-day cast came out swinging. But the quietness, that strategic, clearly intentional absence, spoke louder than anything else. Because when two of the most visible faces of the franchise suddenly stop appearing, stop posting, and stop being tagged by the usual TLC accounts, longtime cast members notice, and so do fans. Andrei and Libby weren't minor players. They had a multi-season arc, featured heavily in family blowouts and tell-all specials. They were the kind of couple producers leaned on when other stories went cold. So when cast members who once shared screen time with them began dropping vague posts about outgrowing toxic energy or choosing peace over pride, viewers instantly connected the dots, even if names weren't used. Take Jovi. He's not quiet online, he never has been. But lately, when asked in DMs or comments about Andrei, he's either left things unread or dropped nothing more than a shrug emoji. Subtle, yes, but that's the new language most reality stars use now. Not outright callouts, but distance. Non-comments. Little signals to show, we see it, but we're not getting involved. It's protection, sure, but it's also part of the story. Because in seasons past, these same cast members didn't hesitate to shout out drama, tag each other, or play along with fan tension. Now, crickets. Angela's reaction, or lack of it, raised some eyebrows too. While she's been involved in almost every other cast scandal online, sometimes by starting them herself, she's been suspiciously quiet anytime the Castrovit scandal comes up. For someone who campaigns hard for cast loyalty and ratings unity, that silence is loud. And that's the theme that keeps repeating, pointed quietness. Even Libby's own siblings, once eager to stir family drama with her, haven't posted about her in months. No birthday shoutouts. No throwback pictures. No congrats, even when people assumed new opportunities might be circling. And if you scroll all the way back to their old pattern of tagging each other before tell-all episodes, that whole rhythm stopped with their final season. Cold, no closure, just a frozen connection. Then came the Instagram subtweets, the filtered quotes, the not-so-gentle reminders shared by fellow cast members, sometimes hours after fans demanded explanation. A few of them went viral. One story from a cast favorite featured a quote card that said, "If you lose friends by setting boundaries, you didn't lose friends, you lost control, freaks." Another wrote, "Every space isn't welcome to trauma dumpers dressed like truth-tellers." Vague. Sure, but the timing was too close to ignore, and the engagement said everything. Hundreds of likes, nods, inside jokes in the comment threads. This wasn't about coincidence. This was about cleaning house through curated silence. Andrei and Libby, for their part, seemed to lean into disappearance. At first, fans assumed they were taking a break. Libby posted a few soft family moments, children's milestones, the kind of pastel-filtered lifestyle content that usually leads to a branding pivot. Andrei dropped off altogether, but when he resurfaced, briefly, the tone was off. He didn't deny anything, didn't address the rumors, but instead reposted a story about not feeding jealousy and living above the noise. Self-victimization. Emotional defense? Maybe both, but it didn't help his case, because at that point, people wanted clarity, and all they got was more fog. But here's the question. Is this clarity we're owed, or drama we've been trained to expect? Because while fans are used to reality stars spilling tea online and exposing each other, not every silence means guilt. And not every ban means someone did something illegal. Sometimes people genuinely fall out with networks. Sometimes they get labeled as more trouble than they're worth. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's easier to end a working relationship than it is to explain the back and forth that led there. Still, for a couple like Andrei and Libby, whose entire storyline ran on volume, opinion, and confrontation, the sudden absence of explanation just didn't fit. They've never been quiet during drama, so why go mute now? One answer might be legal constraints. If TLC did issue formal removal paired with financial penalties or NDAs, then public reactions would be risky. But we've seen other cast members hint around similar gag orders, and they found ways to speak through subtext. Andrei hasn't done that. Libby hasn't either. Their silence doesn't feel strategic. It feels like retreat, and nobody else is rushing to defend them. Cast members who used to plug their podcasts or collab with them for live chats have shifted focus. Channels once sharing behind-the-scenes moments with the couple no longer tag them. Reddit's commentary switched from drama breakdowns to open debates over their alleged behavior on and off set. And perhaps the strangest twist, some fans who once defended them as refreshingly direct have now flipped, calling their silence manipulation, labeling them as bullies hiding behind brand filters. But here's where things get murky. As soon as words like ban and lawsuit start circulating, the term cancel culture pops up. A few users on social threads, and even one former TLC producer in an alleged podcast appearance, argued that viewers are confusing actual accountability with social punishment. That maybe Andrei's confrontational style was always going to rub people wrong, and the network thrived off that for seasons. Did they enable him just long enough to turn around and call it intolerable? It's a fair counterpoint. Can someone be built up by producers, only to be torn down once they stop behaving on cue? The psychology here matters, especially for a cast like this. Andrei wasn't acting villainous alone. TLC made millions drawing attention to that energy. They gave it a platform, season after season. Libby's neutrality was used as a narrative counterweight. They were curated, edited, and monetized as is, until suddenly they weren't. But at the same time, if their behavior truly crossed into territory that made people on set feel unsafe, unprotected, or unable to do their job, then applying the label cancel culture feels like a cop-out. This isn't a comment section firing someone over a tweet. This is reportedly years of discomfort, dysfunction, and displacement of multiple field teams. So maybe the real story here isn't canceling someone, it's finally acknowledging the cost of ignoring someone for too long. And if the cast itself is staying quiet, silently sliding their names off contact lists and group collabs, maybe that's not silence out of fear, maybe that's distance for survival. There's a difference between someone being difficult and someone becoming a liability. And somewhere along the line, Andrei and Libby reportedly crossed that line, not with violence caught on camera, not with the kind of headline-grabbing arrests that flood the tabloids, but in ways that spook the people who usually look the other way. Because quietly, behind the curtain of cast rotations and edited outbursts, production insiders started whispering a word that changes everything. Arrest, not confirmation, not charges, warnings, allegedly discussed by staff, mentioned in passing during internal calls, referenced in hush-hush memos about abhorrent conduct and potential legal intervention if escalation continues. That's not standard production language. That's legal speak, and it doesn't get used unless someone, somewhere, is taking the risk seriously. Now, let's be clear, there's no public police report, no court case filed. But what's being floated behind TLC's enforced silence suggests that cast behavior had escalated to such a degree that internal security protocols weren't enough. Reportedly, certain production events, ones never aired, were flagged to legal teams not because of physical threats, but because the volatility on set was so intense that producers began asking legal consultants how and when consequences would become criminal exposure. Think back to other times TLC stars hit the legal wall. The Duggar scandal didn't become a legal nightmare overnight. It was built over years of warnings, concerns, and buried liabilities. Lauren Dooley, Devon's ex, saw public legal action only after off-screen discretion was sacrificed to public record. In most cases, the network stepped in only when everything was undeniable. Documents, testimony, front-page exposure, but those cases were after the damage hit. What makes this situation different, and possibly more serious, is that intervention was being discussed before any public meltdown. That's rare. That implies TLC didn't want it to go that far. That maybe, just maybe, people behind the scenes were actively trying to steer this situation away from the headlines now surfacing. Multiple sources linked to production described an alleged incident near the end of filming where legal was looped in preemptively. That word matters. They weren't responding to unlawful behavior. They were allegedly preparing for the possibility of it. The details? Vague, legally murky, and protected under standard contracts. But what's been suggested is that staff raised alarms when breakdowns in communication with Andrei became more aggressive and production limits were repeatedly crossed, even after formal warnings. In basic terms, boundaries were set, then reportedly ignored, not once, repeatedly, and that's where the warnings came in. Legal thresholds can be triggered not by intent but by consistent escalation. You don't have to throw a punch to become prosecutable. Refusing direction, disrupting business operations, making verbal threats that cross specific verbal lines. If recorded, if witnessed, if persistent, those things can become reason enough for legal intervention. Especially on a set where contracts were signed, roles were defined, and multiple lives were affected professionally. At some point, producers allegedly stopped asking, "What's the storyline here?" and started asking, "What does the risk assessment say?" Networks run on protection. Protection from lawsuits, riots, and reputational destruction. When the conversations shift to legal containment versus reality show packaging, the character stops being a character. They become a risk. And here's the scary part. If complaints were indeed documented and escalated to the point where legal action was even mentioned, what does that say about what we never saw? Because the show covered so much. Andrei's temper, financial fights, family meltdowns. If those were the scenes fit for air, what got deleted? What didn't make the timeline? That's where public perception starts to fracture. Most fans still see Andrei and Libby as messy but manageable. A volatile couple, sure, but harmless. Now that lens looks naive. Behind the scenes, when a network staffer uses the word pattern, that's rarely emotional, it's operational. That means a spreadsheet, a repeat column of incidents, a timeline that supports legal notice. Even if the final result isn't arrest or press charges, it can still support a decision to ban, blacklist, or back away from all public association. That's what we're seeing now. And this goes beyond one couple. Their situation may define how future 90-day fiancé contracts will be written. Expect new terms, stricter behavior clauses, increased crew protections, and probably a few legal buffers that prevent talent from returning once they've hit certain thresholds. Because if TLC felt even slightly cornered by the Kastrovitz behavior, legal teams will make sure it doesn't happen again. That's how precedent is born inside structured entertainment. We live in a reality show era where blurred lines are part of the product. Producers want intensity. Fans expect fights. But where's the line between a dramatic personality and threatening behavior? Where's the safe middle ground if the tension that sells a season starts to poison a workplace? Here's what we know. TLC reportedly required additional oversight in later shoots involving Andrei and Libby. That's not free. That's not typical. That's an expense added during a time of budget cuts and programming shifts. No network does that without a reason. Add that to the rumored warning emails, reduced scene time, producer rotation, and withheld promotional effort. It paints a pattern of distancing based on concern, not content. And pause for a moment here. Imagine working on a set where a cast member physically intimidates staff, refuses basic direction, storms off in the middle of call times, demands control over scheduling, and deflects accountability when questioned. Even if no laws are broken, even if nothing physical happens, how long can that environment exist before someone says, "Enough," and when they start preparing legal responses before something even happens? That's not cancellation. That's protection. The missed interviews, the skipped reunions, the sudden disappearance from all TLC segments, even retro ones. These aren't public punishments, they're quiet exits, designed to shield the machine while publicly brushing it off. And the question we're now forced to ask is chilling. What behavior gets buried quietly? And what evidence was serious enough that arrest warnings became part of the private conversation? There's something heavy in the way this story unfolded. Not chaotic, controlled, strategically quiet. And maybe that's the real giveaway. Because when a network like TLC, built on highly produced conflict and explosive personalities, completely erases two of its biggest returning stars without so much as a vague PR statement, something bigger than bad behavior likely went down. And now, whispers inside the industry suggest it wasn't just damage control. It may have been cover-up. Multiple sources connected to production now allege that crew complaints about Andrei were not only documented, but in some cases downplayed, rerouted, or buried entirely for years. Not ignored, managed. Instead of enforcement, they were reportedly handled through direct producer overrides, one-on-one cast coaching, or in the most serious cases, simply pulled from the record chain under the defense of handled verbally. That's how these things get buried quietly. You don't pretend they didn't happen, you just make sure there's no paper trail. And if that's even half true, TLC wasn't just complicit, they were protecting something. Because when crew reports repeatedly go unlogged, or when complaints don't escalate using their standard HR protocols, someone's making that decision. Someone higher up. And for what? To keep a volatile storyline running. To meet episode quotas. If the safety and sanity of the people making the show were sidelined just to protect a single cast member's contract, that's not just neglect. That's liability. Liability is the word TLC reportedly feared most in those last months. Not optics, not fan backlash, legal risk. Because the moment behind the scenes behavior crosses into potential claims, whether it's a hostile work environment or ignored warnings, the network becomes the fall guy. Producers stop being creative. They start being witnesses. And in this case, internal stories point to a tipping point moment. One shoot, one day, one allegedly now infamous clash that, while specifics remain sealed, reportedly sent ripple effects through the network's internal teams like nothing else had before. What made that moment different? According to one person with indirect knowledge, it wasn't louder. It wasn't worse. It was recorded, not for the show, but on a crew member's device. And while that footage has never surfaced publicly, it was allegedly shown internally, and it shocked them. It wasn't a physical outburst, but visually it told the whole story. Breakdowns in communication, belligerence, dismissal of rules, and at least one moment that reportedly came close to triggering protocol that would shut the entire set down for safety review. That's the line. The one no network wants to talk about publicly. Because when that line is crossed and proven, the cleanup isn't PR friendly, it's legal. The fact that this couple, known for explosive drama, sharp opinions, and signature feuds, suddenly vanished without a single staged exit tells us everything about TLC's guilt in the build-up. There was no redemption arc, no send-off, no final tell-all to close their story, just silence, erasure, the kind that looks less like a network cutting ties and more like a corporation sweeping up too many years of bad calls. And the most disturbing part, this didn't happen overnight. Every piece of public chaos we saw was apparently shadowed by layers of private concern we never knew existed. Moments that required field producers to coach crew through tense conditions. Instances where filming had to be reshuffled on the fly to avoid certain conflicts. Entire teams warned in advance that this couple was difficult today, as if hypermanagement had just become part of their process. Add to that dozens of missed red flags, the outbursts reframed as passion, the demands reframed as personality, the on-set clashes reframed as scheduling issues. Every deflection planted a seed. And eventually, those seeds didn't grow into storylines, they grew into risk, insurance risk, lawsuit risk, reputational risk. There's a limit to how long chaos can be masked as content. And TLC allegedly knew how close they were flying. Which raises the question, did they keep the show going because of the visibility, or despite the damage? Because if crew members truly raised alerts and were quietly overruled, that's a choice. If segments were actively edited to protect certain cast members from public criticism, while privately tracking patterns of mistreatment or power playing behind the scenes, that's a decision made for ratings, not ethics. And now, TLC has to sit with that. A long-serving assistant producer reportedly said something telling behind closed doors. It wasn't about the couple's behavior, it was about leadership. She allegedly said, "We don't get to be shocked now. This was the storm we watched build. Not everyone signed off on how it played out, but enough people looked the other way to let it last several seasons, and that's the true scandal here." Imagine being the camera operator showing up each morning wondering whether today would just be drama or danger. Imagine spending 8 hours trying to film a dinner scene while privately worried about an off-camera meltdown derailing the entire shoot. That's what TLC was allegedly hiding. Not assault, not crime, but chronic, unchecked harm to the very people holding the show together. And yet, their story was pushed forward season after season. They became characters, sentences written for them, just enough editing to flatten the edge. TLC polished the rough without ever removing the blade. And now that it's caught up with them, they've just closed the door and walked away, hoping no one asks who left it open for so long. But when a network chooses silence over safety, protection over people, and ratings over red flags, the real question isn't what happened to Andrei and Libby. It's how far TLC was willing to go to keep it hidden. For two people who built their reality TV identity around loud confrontations and unfiltered reactions, the total silence from Andrei and Libby has become its own kind of scream. No live reacting to fan theories. No subtle digs at other cast members. No attempts to clear the air or claim innocence. Not even a denial. And while that silence might look like an admission to some, it might also be something else entirely, control, survival, or quiet damage control behind the scenes. Because for all the storminess the world saw, what's happening on their side now is absence. And that absence says something. At their height, they were visible almost daily. Joint lives, couple Q and As, behind-the-scenes content shot between airing blocks. Andrei played the dominant protector role, always on guard, always a little defensive. Libby was the anchor, more reserved, wrapped in calm, but never too far behind when damage had to be cleaned up. Now, it's been months since either of them publicly addressed anything beyond surface-level life updates. Not one mention of the ban, not one acknowledgement of rumors, no shade, no spin, but even silence has tone, and theirs isn't neutral. Libby's posts, few as they are, feel filtered in more than just color. Captions about peace and family time, quotes about removing negativity and protecting your mental health, it all suggests a subtle distancing, even if she won't name what or who she's distancing from. There's also a shift in her photo presence, more solo shots with the kids, less identity shared with Andrei's presence, no aggressive self-branding, no business launches, she's not rebranding, she's retreating. Andrei, on the other hand, barely posts at all now, and when he does, the tone rarely budges from defiant. He's not fighting directly, but the energy is cold, hollow optimism. Occasionally, content pulled from other pages about being misunderstood or not caring what fake people think. No interaction with followers, no comments addressed. Just vague reposts with the type of passive aggression you only learn from public fallout. To understand their silence, you have to put public perception aside and look at what this kind of exit does to people who built an identity on visibility. Being erased from the screen meant more than lost income, it meant lost influence. That's not just career damage, that's an ego collapse. When your value for years has been tied to how many people care enough to argue about you, being shut out cuts deep. There's also pressure behind the scenes. Reports suggest TLC wanted to keep things internal. If the couple had fired back publicly or insinuated breach of contract, that likely would have escalated private tensions into public legal exchanges. And that's a battle neither side seems willing to risk. So the silence may not be voluntary. It may be strategic avoidance under legal guidance, advice that tells you to say nothing even when your entire brand has always depended on saying everything. And somewhere in all this quiet, maybe something real is happening to both of them, not as reality characters, but as people. Because no matter how difficult their behavior may have been, no one enters this industry expecting it to devour their reputation. And in being shut out without closure, there's likely a different kind of breakdown unfolding in the background. For Libby, who spent years defending Andrei, this isolation may feel like personal failure. On TV, she was protective but never dominating. She allowed him to lead in conflicts, stood by him through family ruptures, and tried to hold the middle ground when the storyline tilted into open warfare. Internally, that kind of loyalty can become a weight. And when it finally collapses under its own contradictions, the emotional fallout can be brutal. Being seen as an accomplice to someone's mistakes, even if you disagreed, especially when you're silent about it, it creates guilt, whether it's earned or not. Andrei's side, we can guess, is different. He always thrived off structure, control, perceived honor. Being told what to do was something he fought against over and over. Now he's backed into silence, unable to reclaim the narrative, and facing potential legal headaches that play directly into the system he claimed to resist. For someone who always saw himself as the one steering, that loss of control must be unbearable. But we could all benefit from leaving some room for compassion, without denying consequence. Because there's a real difference between behavior that damages others and behavior that's a response to damage itself. Maybe part of what fans interpreted as toxic control from Andrei was actually survival mode. A man hyperalert to what could be taken from him, needing to dominate because otherwise he'd feel disposable. Maybe Libby's passivity wasn't weakness but conditioning. Standing by, controlling optics, trying to soothe chaos into consistency. It doesn't excuse what insiders allege happened in private, but it reminds us that what plays out on TV only scratches the surface of who these people are underneath the production polish. Reality shows blur the line between entertainment and essence. We start projecting roles onto humans and calling them characters. Eventually, we start treating their real downfalls as plot points. But what happens when those roles become inescapable? When behavior shaped for TV spills into real life and starts causing real damage, not just outside, but inside, that's the real tragedy here. Not that they lost a platform or a paycheck, but that somewhere along the way, the exaggerated personas they leaned into for survival may have drowned out the people underneath. And now, in silence, those people remain unseen and maybe, even to themselves, unknowable. So we're left with this. Were they always the chaos, or did they become it because it's the only part of them production ever fed? Everything that's happened with Andrei and Libby, quiet bans, reported lawsuits, backstage warnings that escalated way beyond petty drama, leaves one unavoidable question hanging over the future of 90 Day Fiancé. What now? Because this wasn't just a messy couple getting cut loose. This was a very specific wake-up call. A line that finally got drawn, maybe 5 seasons too late, and the industry is watching what TLC does next. Fans might see this as a one-off, but networks don't think in single scandals. They think in formulas, liabilities, and replication risks. If a pair becomes high risk and expensive, you better believe future contracts will be rewritten with that exact behavior in mind. Before, casting used to prioritize heat, intensity, unpredictability, nerves that could be wound and unwound on screen. Now, TLC may need to screen for control. Not just who's good TV, but who can handle being good TV without unraveling everything around them. And that shift might reroute the very tone of the show. Multiple crew insiders have reportedly hinted that legal teams are now reinforcing the framework for filming. That means tighter behavior clauses, faster escalation triggers before someone becomes a long-term problem, maybe even psychological assessments, a stricter review process of social media activity, or tiered penalties when production days are damaged. Essentially, TLC might stop signing personalities and start signing professionals who can play a role without causing real-world risk outside the frame. But there's a deeper tension behind all this because fans don't want cast members to behave like actors. They want real reactions, spontaneous breakdowns, unpredictable intensity. That's the unspoken contract between viewers and these shows. Audiences sign on emotionally. They watch because it feels raw, messy, and unfiltered. But behind that illusion is one iron rule: don't break the machine. Andrei and Libby reportedly broke the machine. Not in how they argued with cast, not even in how they fought producers verbally, but in how their presence reached a point where crews couldn't focus, episodes got delayed, and internal staff spoke out. That's how a story turns from entertainment into exposure. That's when legal says enough. And now, everyone who wants to be on reality TV knows that limit exists, even if no one's officially explained where it is. We've seen moments like this before, across other franchises. MTV's The Challenge had to restructure after cast behavior nearly caused full production shutdowns. Bravo has quietly removed Real Housewives without narrative closure after off-screen danger collided with on-screen value. Even Big Brother, a show built on pushing human behavior to uncomfortable levels, has found itself facing backlash over who's held accountable when things go too far off-script. The difference between then and now: viewers are paying attention in new ways. They're tracking cast behavior outside the show, holding networks responsible for who they platform, and social media gives fans a paper trail to prove if production kept enabling someone long after red flags were visible. So what TLC does from here has more riding on it than just ratings. This is about risk culture, trust erosion, and whether the network can evolve without neutering its own franchise. There's conversation already brewing around how 90 Day Fiancé has shifted from organic storytelling, two people sincerely struggling with love across borders, to something else, something shinier but less honest. Some fans say it now feels staged, exaggerated, or overly curated. And ironically, it's that filtration that makes explosions like this one feel all the more disruptive. Because if you're controlling so much, how did this slip through? That layering of filtered storytelling, selective editing, and damage management creates its own kind of pressure cocoon. Entitlement grows quietly on long-term stars, especially ones who have been heavily protected. And once they start believing they are the storyline, it's easy for them to treat boundaries like suggestions. Andrei's arc is the perfect example of that. He started off as brash but still moldable. By the final seasons, he wasn't just pushing back on family members. Allegedly, he was pushing production around too. That's the danger of fame without friction. A cast member can go from volatile to untouchable if the network structure allows it. Moving forward, TLC will need to build more friction into the system, not in how cast explodes on each other, but in how red flags are acknowledged and acted on behind the scenes. Ships only sink when too many leaks are ignored, and if the network wants to keep sailing, the patchwork can't come after damage hits full tilt. It has to be preemptive. There's also something to be said about the nature of reality fame itself. It doesn't look like celebrity fame. It looks more accessible. It tricks cast members into believing they're in control because they're being watched as themselves. But the psychological shift that happens when millions form opinions about your relationship in real time is profound. Some people lean into it, others don't survive it. And the ones who mix ego with instability, fame with entitlement, and audience approval with real-world power, those are the ones who implode. Future cast hopefuls watching this fallout will have to ask themselves harder questions than any green card form ever required. Can they handle being portrayed messily without breaking down offset? Can they take criticism without threatening post-crew in DMS? Can they walk into a franchise built on emotional chaos without needing to be the center of it? Because if the answer's no, this franchise might not just chew you up, it might cost you opportunity, reputation, and future work. Permanently, the biggest irony of all. The same system that elevated Andrei and Libby ultimately created their undoing. They were shaped to stir conflict, encouraged to speak louder, act bolder, fight harder. But when the limits were finally enforced, there was no rollback option left. They weren't just cut. They were uninvited from the entire conversation. And whether future couples thrive or fail on this show will come down to one question more than any visa ever could. Can they survive the story without becoming the casualty behind it? It started with whispers, talk of a sudden disappearance, broken contracts, $1 million problem no one in the building wanted to spell out. Now, all these episodes later, those whispers have built into something heavier. Not just a scandal, not just a ban, but a moment that might have cracked open something much bigger in the DNA of 90 Day Fiancé. Andrei and Libby weren't the first couple to push the limits, but they might be the first to be held to account in a way that goes so far beyond spin. Their absence isn't just noticeable, it feels like a decision made at the very top, by people who used to rely on their drama the most. And that raises the question we all felt back in the first few beats of this story: what finally changed? Because the warning signs were always part of the package. The fiery personality, the control streak, the fights that always seemed too raw for comfort. TLC knew exactly who it was working with. And if crew reports are true, the problems started long before the audience ever noticed. So why wait until now? The most obvious answer is that things got too expensive, financially, legally, emotionally. But the deeper truth, TLC may have stayed silent too long, protected personalities who didn't protect others, prioritized chaos for cameras, at the cost of the people responsible for holding the whole thing together behind the scenes. That's not just a production flaw. That's a structural miscalculation the network is now trying to clean up in the quietest way possible. And as fans, we have to confront our own role in this dynamic too. Are we enabling systems that reward volatility because it's entertaining? Or can we tell the difference between story-engineered conflict and real-world harm? It's easy to forget sometimes that what we watch is only the highlight reel. We're seeing the best-lit angles, the most dramatic edits, the confessional moments that made producers nod in approval. We don't see what happens when cameras are down and crew members are dealing with fallout. We don't see the toll it takes when someone shows up already angry, already resistant, already convinced they're above being told no. And behind every fake dinner fight or staged move-in scene, there's a stack of paperwork, NDAs, medical support, insurance limits, and a crew on edge because things might turn real, and not in the way anyone signed up for. Andrei and Libby became characters that viewers either loved or hated, no in between. But in building those characters, it's clear now that something got lost, and maybe it's not just their fault. The machine built around them demanded more each season. More conflict, more reactions, bigger stakes. And when people are rewarded season after season for pushing limits, where do you expect them to stop? Maybe they didn't know how. Or maybe they thought they'd never be asked to. Viewers have more power in this than they realize. TLC doesn't air what doesn't get ratings. If toxic patterns are rewarded with viral edits and high traffic, those patterns are repeated. But if the audience begins to push back, if people begin to call for safer, emotionally sustainable content over spectacle, they're forced to listen. Still, we're a long way from that shift. Even now, half the fanbase is still asking for new content about Andrei and Libby. Some want updates, others want closure. But underneath both requests is something deeper. It was never about their marriage. It was about the spectacle of watching it disintegrate, one confrontation at a time, knowing it wasn't us. That's the cost of toxic reality fame. It's only sustainable when the people living it stop being real to us. But these aren't sitcom characters. They're navigating pressure, embarrassment, career loss, maybe even legal consequences, while being stripped of the very medium they once used to frame their own story. And maybe that's the cruelest part of the 90-day system. It makes people famous for being themselves, then takes everything away the second that self becomes too messy for PR. It's not correction. It's erasure, like the mess never happened, as if TLC can just cast someone new, write a new dysfunctional love story, and pretend this one wasn't both their goldmine and their reckoning. But the pattern doesn't reset unless someone forces it to. Will we, as viewers, keep rewarding chaos until someone else crosses the same lines? Or will this be the point where the franchise starts to change what it looks for in a couple, not just explosive opinions, but emotional capacity, accountability, and respect for the people who have to work around the fallout. There's no simple answer, but there is, now, undeniable clarity. Sometimes the biggest meltdowns don't happen on screen, they happen the moment the lights go off and the cast realizes there's no more protection left, no edit to hide behind, no camera crew to blame. Just silence. And in that silence, we're left with something heavier than drama. We're left with consequence. If you thought this was the wildest breakdown 90 Day has ever seen, wait until you hear what other insiders say has been quietly building behind another popular couple's latest disappearance.